Thank you very much thank you very much to the organising team for the invitation to speak with you today, and thank you in particular for your choice of theme for the conference as a whole. The idea of the social responsibility of librarians. I think it's an excellent one. I think it's also a really important one because we need to think, as a sector, we need always to be deeply attentive to what it is that societies, that individuals actually need from us. It's very easy for us to be within settings like this, within settings like IFLA's World Library and Information Congress, to be talking amongst ourselves, to be making assumptions about what it is that the world needs from its libraries, what it is that we can deliver. But we really need actually to be thinking, we need to be looking at ourselves from those external perspectives and thinking, well, actually, what is needed? And I think to do that, this is why I think the idea of talking about a social contract for library, a social contract, the place of libraries within that is a really useful tool. So I'm conscious that this is, of course, a keynote presentation. And so we are going to, and so we'll sort of, it's very much of stepping back. It's very much offering a framework through which to consider other issues, the other presentations, the other information that will be shared throughout this session. So in terms of what we're going to be covering today, I think we'll start by having a look at the idea of libraries as a manifestation of the social contract and talking a little bit about what that concept can mean and how it might apply in our cases. Going a little bit further, unpacking what the bargain is, the deal is between libraries and society as a whole, looking at the factors that may be changing that deal, changing expectations, changing possibilities that we need to be bearing in mind, and crucially thinking about how do we consider, how do we think about this relationship into the long term. In terms of what I hope we'll be able to achieve from the session is, firstly, you have a lens, both within the context of this conference and more broadly about reflecting on how we can maximize impact, on how we can have the greatest positive consequence on our societies. That I think in doing this, we can also place ourselves better within the wider ecosystem of the institutions, the agencies, the stakeholders who are working to achieve some of the same goals as us. Certainly, the idea of a social contract is absolutely not unique to the library field as a whole. It applies in many other places. And also, hopefully, to give you some clues, some hints about how you can start and how you can make better use of reflection on trends and futures in your own planning, within your institutions, within your practice, but also as a system as a whole. So, to start off with the concept of a social contract, I'm very much aware that these are some European ideas, and that I'm going to be quoting from a couple of European thinkers. This is obviously just one small part of the world, but I think it's nonetheless it's these are also models that have formed the development of the idea of the contemporary state and so on. So I think they've at least influenced where we're going. Of course, you can always challenge ideas, but um, so the idea of the social contract comes about from the time where the idea that there should be an automatic trust in leaders, an automatic trust in kings and princes and popes, etc., that was breaking down. That if they were going to be able to rule, if they were going to be able to enjoy legitimacy, it was important that we saw that there was a relationship, a contract between people, between peoples, and those who are actually in charge. Um, the idea was increasingly that that leaders depended on the communities, on the individuals, on the collectives that actually were, but that they ruled as a whole. For example, you start seeing references. People were no longer kings of a place, but kings of a people, for example. And that idea builds on the idea and the justification that came for this, both from British philosophers such as Hobbes and French or Swiss ones such as Rousseau, is the idea that you could justify the existence of governments, of institutions, of power structures, because we were better doing things together than apart in what Hobbes talks about as the state of nature. That, for example, we're better able to protect ourselves to ensure security if we do it together. We're better able to make markets work, to ensure that people behave, to ensure that everyone can benefit, can find food, can find can find materials, can find employment, and so on, if we work together. We can have a government that can actually provide these services if we collectively organize taxation, if we collectively build up revenue to build up a pool of resources and so achieve economies of scale. And I would argue that actually libraries are a good example of this logic of why it is better, how it is better to do things together. The development of libraries you can see in many parts of the world is based on the idea that at some point simply relying on a few individuals, a few rich individuals to build up collections is not ideal. It means there is limited access to it. There's limited access. It means that not everyone is able to access the information they need to fulfill their rights, to contribute to growth, to contribute to development. But it's also very few individuals and increasingly few who are actually able to bring together all relevant information, organize it in such a way as to make it useful. So arguably libraries are an example of the development of that broader, more all-encompassing view of what government should be, of how society should work together. Crucially, the logic behind this then moves to the sense, this is in particular with people like Rousseau, the idea that there's a deal, that effectively governments leaders are allowed to restrict, to impose constraints on people, to collect taxes, to impose laws, to impose controls. But this only happens if they are legitimate because they are making life better. They're showing the benefits of doing something collectively, and they're accepted as doing so. And as I was saying at the beginning, that where these ideas come from is crucially that there is no divine right. There's no sense that people automatically, regardless of how competently or incompetently they work, that they are allowed to rule. Now, it's quite a dramatic phrase, but I'd like to argue, and this is one of the key messages I hope comes from this, is the idea that actually we cannot believe in a divine right of libraries. We always need to be ready to challenge ourselves, to ask ourselves that key question of, are we doing the best job possible? Are we fulfilling our responsibilities, not just in our own eyes, not just because we assume so, but because we can show, because we know, because we keep on interrogating ourselves, are we delivering also for communities? So just unpacking the bargain, going into sort of what this agreement actually is and what it looks like. In a very simple way, we can see that the social contract that underpins libraries and the work of libraries can be seen as a deal where, in effect, users, so we'll go into more depth, the asterisks are there for a reason, where users are providing resources. That's through their taxation, that's through their fees, their university fees, that's through providing broader support to community libraries and others. They are willing to give that up, to not use those resources, those possibilities to do something else. They're willing to give these up to libraries because in turn, libraries provide services and provide support to users. They provide something that users could not achieve on their own. It is worth, and this is one of the key points I want also that you can come away with from this session as well, is that crucially, we're not just talking about individuals here. I know that this is also, a lot of the ideas of providing an individualized service to each user, their book, etc. We are very focused on this idea of fulfilling individual rights, fulfilling needs, providing a service that is tailored to the needs of individual people. But we also need to think about how we are providing collective solutions and how are we supporting society as a whole. There's some interesting and I would think actually quite challenging work that's coming out of some recent efforts to think about the contribution of libraries, which is they're actually saying quite openly, quite freely, that in a population, maybe actually only 10% of the population is actually really using many parts of the library, maybe even less. And actually saying, well, maybe that's okay, because the 10% that we are helping are the ones who really, really need it, who otherwise may not have access to information, who may not be able to enjoy their rights to information, to education, to access to health and more. And that matters because, in fact, that's a way of supporting the broader sustainability of society, especially under the Sustainable Development Goals, the role of social sustainability, the importance of not excluding parts of the population, the importance of maintaining a degree of equality is there. And so if libraries are helping to avoid exclusion, if they're helping to avoid discrimination by helping those parts of the population that need it most, then that is actually a contribution to society as a whole because it's delivering on that need for social development. So crucially, it means effectively that when we're thinking about our users, we're not just thinking about the individuals, but we're also thinking about the non-users. How are we actually helping them live in a healthier, more equitable, more sustainable society? How are we contributing to a broader policy agendas around health, around well-being, around the sustainability of communities as a whole? So thinking both, not just, as I said, not just about the individual, but also about the collective is important. And similarly, therefore, when we're talking about the libraries and the support that we're providing, clearly, everyone is in a job, everyone is working within their own context, but it's also valuable to think about ourselves as a collective. To what extent are we, as a network, as a system, able to deliver at that wider level, able to do things that actually move society forwards as a whole? So making sure that for all that we want to focus on the individual success stories, that we don't forget the macro where we can also make a huge contribution. Therefore, just to summarize what I've been saying over the last couple of minutes, we need to see that libraries have that responsibility both to individuals and to society as a whole. Crucially from this, we need to think about our benchmark, our yardstick needs to be how we are perceived, looking from those external perspectives, those community perspectives. How are we actually doing? We need to always challenge, are the metrics that we're using, are the measures that we're using, do they really reflect what is needed? Do they really reflect what those on the other side of the social contract, the bargain that we have with our communities, what they want and think? So we can have a sort of social contract test of, are we providing a service that deserves the trust and loyalty of the individuals and societies we serve? Making things more complicated, this is not a static issue, and the previous keynote speaker went into some of these issues in a way that I think was extremely helpful and is probably more targeted than what I'm doing. We are keen, and this is a long-standing priority within IFLA, is to think about, to ensure that when we are planning, when we are thinking about what our role is, what our unique value added is, what it means to be an institution that aims to realize, to mobilize knowledge on behalf of communities. What does that look like in a changing world? Because even if our mission, even if our long-term goal is constant, the practices, the way we actually do that changes. That does not stay the same. So last year we released our trend report, first major update since 2013, and this aims to help by providing thought tools, structures, which you can use, which you can reflect on, which you can interrogate, which you can tear apart, put back together, but which collectively, the idea is that this then, it provides a means of actually trying to make the future part of what we're doing, to interrogate, in particular to challenge assumptions that we might have about what constitutes effective practice, what constitutes a successful library. The trend report sets out 7 major trends. There are sub-trends underneath this, and this ranges across a wide variety of information issues. So from the changing knowledge practices, so the valuation of different forms of knowledge, moving beyond the idea of that only certain types of knowledge from certain sources are valuable. The previous keynote speaker talked about the decolonization of medicine, the decolonization of health, and that's exactly it. It's moving away from the idea that it's only certain people from certain part of the world who are valued, but it's also the rise of different types of information, realizing that data is valuable in a way that we may not have realized before. Clearly, there's the role of technology. Everyone talks about AI, but the impact this has about what we can believe, the potential for people to create new ideas, which is very exciting, the potential to extend learning. We talked also clearly there about using AI to translate materials into local languages. That's powerful. At the same time, also questions about trustworthiness, the ease of fooling people. That's clearly going to be there. The renegotiation of trust, the trend towards a loss of faith in government to a large extent, in media. So there's places which people traditionally used to turn to see, to actually understand what was going on. Libraries, however, maintain trust to some extent, but that also can't be taken for granted. Also questions about what are the merits of openness? Are there any risks that openness can be co-opted, falls within there? More complex skills and ability, the need to have the need for higher digital skills to find a place in the labour market, or at least a comfortable place in the labour market is there. But also a growing recognition of the importance of media and information literacy, the ability to sift and to navigate through a very complex, rich information environment is also up there. The fact that the digital divide is still a thing, that there are still 2 billion people who don't have internet access, but even among the 6 billion or so who do, the fact that many of them, it's still very limited. It's only through a small screen. It's only limited data. So the reality that there are still people who are cut off. And in fact, as society digitalizes, we're in a situation where as society digitalizes, we're in a situation where those who don't have access are increasingly cut off, because more and more of our economic, social, cultural, political life takes place online. The digital divide, the gap becomes greater. The need to deal with resource use, the consequences of climate change, obviously, but the realization that as we need to potentially limit energy use, we're going to have to take some hard decisions about how often we update our IT, about what we can even save at all, given the environmental cost of saving information. And finally, a shift towards, and this comes partly from the pandemic, a growing understanding of the value of physical connections, a tech clash, it gets described as in some contexts, the idea that actually people are rediscovering place, they value space, they see the limits of the online world, and so the need to actually find opportunities to be with others. These can lead to a wide variety of implications. I'm not going to go into huge depth here because I'm conscious of time here, but for example, already when we're talking about the implications of these trends, what is changing in terms of the needs and the expectations of the users we're serving, and who ultimately their views, their support is the benchmark that we need to bear in mind for libraries. So we can see that there will be growing expectations of representation, an unwillingness simply to accept that certain voices, the dominance of certain voices. Clearly, there's an interest in using technology, but potentially also fears, concerns, worries about this, a desire, worries about this. A sense of no longer trusting someone because they'd say that they are trustworthy. We're certainly not in a world where someone can stand up and say, trust me, and then that will actually work. We need to be aware that because there are other sources of information, because there is a risk of conspiracy theories and more, we cannot take trust for granted. We cannot take trust for granted. There's basic needs about how to function in the digital world, to find work and more, but also the desire to fill rights, to be able to access heritage, to be able to form relationships, to actually connect with broader communities, as well as, of course, to stay safe in the face of climate change, and obviously join with the organisers in the recognition of the tragic loss of those who have lost their lives, and more in the recent cyclone, that this is something that's not going to become less common in the future. There's also that need for connection, highlighted in the 7th trend, different attitudes towards inequality. So we're facing a society that will think about us, that will have changing needs, changing expectations on that side of the bargain. Of course, these trends, the change in society, also, they affect what we can offer, and what's happening on our side. They force us to ask some questions about how we can boost our impact and reach through technology. What works effectively? How can we add value in an information-rich world? I think it's a fundamental shift for libraries is of course, the fact that People no longer need to rely on the library to find out in basic information. They no longer need to do a lot of things that once the reference desk may have had a monopoly on. This should be an opportunity to move up the value chain, to think about what more we do. But we need to be aware that there'll always be someone, there'll be a tech entrepreneur who is out there proposing that their app can solve that particular policy issue. That's the competition here. And we need to be able to understand, to underline, to set out how it is that we actually add value, that we are a valuable partner in this social contract. There are questions about visibility. How can we make sure that our communities are actually seen and recognized? This is about the work of university libraries to promote the dissemination of research, of making sure that it's not just those who are published in big, rich Western journals from big, rich Western universities whose voices are heard, who are able to contribute to scientific debate. But it's also about cultural issues, about making sure that local regional cultures don't just get swamped, they don't get diluted by whatever's coming from Hollywood or beyond. We need to think about our value as spaces, as underlined that there's a complex relationship with technology, a rediscovery of the physical, but that then challenges us to say, well, okay, we have spaces, but are these spaces that are actually welcoming? Are these spaces that enable people to realize the potential of actually physically coming together? Are we making it possible for people to meet, to form new connections in the best way possible? Because you then have to make those spaces accessible for all. Are there people who, through the rules we make, the provisions we apply, the policies we make, are we actually at risk of excluding people? How can we make sure that everyone is able to get in there? And of course, there's additional questions. I'm conscious there's a lot of questions in these ones. It's then, as I said, it's going back and thinking about the importance of those perspectives of users, the perspectives of the people on the other side of that social contract. Who is there? Who's relying on us? Who's affected by the trend? Can we look ahead? Can we anticipate who is going to be most need access to reliable information? Who is going to be most worried about what they see online and so want to find support and help in order to get there? Who is most going to need the help of a public interest institution in order to be able to get the best out of the technology that they have? Who is going to need to find new work, build new skills? So we need to be thinking about these. We also, when we change ourselves, we need to be carrying out those cost benefit analyses. We need to look at what we're doing today, think about, is this actually helpful? Who is using these services? Who might not be? Why may they not be? Are they actually still relevant? We need to think about how we can deliver at scale. We are a national-wide, a region-wide, a global network, but too often we act in sort of silos, or we act within our own institutions, rather than thinking about how can we coordinate, how can we do better nationally. But at the same time, how can we do that without losing the ability to tailor our services to our individual communities? And so in the final section, just to make things even more complicated, it's underlining that we aren't just focusing on what people need today. We're not just trying to understand what those needs, what those expectations might be. But if we want to be sustainable, if we want to contribute to sustainability, we need also to think about what are the needs of future generations. This is the key to the idea of sustainability, of sustainable development. It's first set out in the Brundtland Report, and which, of course, features within the name of the Sustainable Development Goals. But how can we meet those needs of the present, the communities we have today, but also meet the needs of the future? And this requires us to look towards that future, to apply tools, to apply the logic of futures thinking, to apply the intelligence, the information we have in order to do that. And in doing so, this provides an opportunity also, once again, to think about what are the assumptions that we have about that future? What do we think is happening? Are we sure? Are these assumptions rather than truths? Do they actually need to be challenged? And so in this, we need to have that logic, just as we think about, are we fulfilling our side of the bargain with individuals today? We also need to think about what might the future look like. And our trend report certainly highlights a number of potential scenarios. We need to look at what that future needs from libraries. What will it be considered as socially responsible then? How can we ensure basically, imagining ourselves in the future. How can we ensure that a future society can look back and say that we made the right decisions today, that we made optimal decisions to make sure that we were providing those key values, that key support to societies. So just, I don't know, to head towards that finishing line, and just summing up some of those ideas, which I think, as I said, are very much intended to be framing for this conference for this conference as a whole. And esteemed colleagues, expert colleagues will go into some of the details of what things actually look like. But if we want to be fulfilling our side of the bargain, fulfilling our side of the social contract between libraries and communities, a key one is being alert and responsive to need. We can't just sit there, imagine what people need. We certainly shouldn't use the services that we have as a starting point. We need to start by thinking, well, what is needed? What is required? And in particular, what is our value added? Where are we doing things that others simply cannot do? Where are we providing a combination of services, a combination of support that others simply can't? And therefore think about how it is we can maximize that impact. We shouldn't leave assumptions unchallenged. I think, again, it's the value of events like this. It's the sharing, it's the building up of energy, the building up of commitment. But we always just need to be clear that in talking to ourselves, we're not risking creating an echo chamber. We need to be really careful to spot when we say that something is a truth, when we say that something is a part of our credo. We need to be ready to challenge and say, well, is that actually the case? Can we show that? So yeah, challenging those assumptions around what our value is, what the difference we can make is valuable. Crucially, we need to focus on purpose, not practice. I already said we shouldn't use our practice as the starting point. Libraries have already changed a huge amount. Libraries will need to change more. We are at a time of rapid evolution in the information environment. And if we stay simply doing the things we've always done, we risk becoming less relevant. We risk no longer fulfilling our side of the bargain. We need to be clear to ourselves about what is that purpose? What is it we are trying to do? What is it that society needs overall? And then update our practice, end services, end ways of doing things that aren't particularly helpful, and be able to update them. And crucially, in doing so, we need to think we're not just in an agreement, we're not just in a bargain with our societies, with our communities today, but we also need to think about our responsibility to the future, act as if the future is at the table with us when we are planning. So with that, I want to say thank you very much for your time, and I'm looking forward to following up the discussions now. Thank you.